What happens when the woman who built the backbone of a tech empire is suddenly erased from it? She didn't crash the system. She was the system. So, what do you do when the new CEO fires the only person who holds the keys without reading the fine print? Why would someone so essential be called redundant? And what does it take for a woman in tech, silenced and underestimated, to reclaim not just her job, but the truth, the power, and her name? This isn't a story about revenge. It's about resilience. It's about a quiet, brilliant architect who refused to disappear, and the company that nearly collapsed because they forgot who was holding it up. You're about to witness a corporate reckoning, led not with anger, but with undeniable value, legal precision, and unshakable calm. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because this isn't just a story. It's a reminder. Underestimate her, and you light the match. Let's begin. I still remember the first time I saw him. Garrett Vaughan. He walked into headquarters like the world had just been handed to him on a silver platter. A sharply tailored black suit, gleaming watch, confidence radiating from every 6-foot frame, and absolutely no clue about what we actually did. "Call me Garrett," he said, flashing a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I like things neat, fast and efficient. We're going to make big things happen, starting today." There was a pause. Then came the awkward clapping, the kind you only hear at company meetings or preschool recitals. I stayed silent, arms crossed. I'd been with Virion Systems for nearly 9 years. I'd survived 2 CEOs, 4 rounds of restructuring, and 1 hellish acquisition. I knew how to stay alive in this game, but Garrett didn't, and he was about to learn his first lesson. The first week was chaos. He cancelled all regular project review meetings and replaced them with vision alignment syncs. By Thursday, he had already fired 3 mid-level managers, 2 of them via email. Then he started tampering with the company's core software with zero understanding of the system architecture. That system, I built it 6 years ago, right after a merger nearly sank the company. I redesigned the entire back-end infrastructure. Lightweight, secure, scalable, and I didn't just design it. I patented it under my name, a protective move recommended by the previous CEO. He used to say, "Mira Dalton, if you ever leave, we'll be begging you to come back." It was buried in the employment contract, a small clause most executives never bother to read. Garrett certainly hadn't. By the second week, he started referring to me as the technical team lead instead of my actual title, Director of Systems Architecture. A subtle demotion, but clear enough. In meetings, he avoided eye contact, regularly interrupted, and repeatedly praised junior employees for ideas I had already proposed. Classic tactic, diminish, obscure, sideline. I stayed calm, as always, but I had started documenting everything. Then came Friday morning. Garrett strolled into my office, leaning against the doorframe like he was auditioning for a B-list workplace drama. "Mira, got a sec?" he asked. I gestured toward the chair across from me. He didn't sit. "I'll be direct," he began in that tone men use when they think directness is a gift. "You've been here too long. Things are changing, and we need people who operate at a different speed." I raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" "We believe your position is no longer necessary. Effective immediately. There'd be a severance package. HR was preparing the paperwork. Too scripted, too arrogant." I nearly laughed, but I just leaned back, looked at him, looked closely. He had no idea. No idea I owned the system. No clue what that small clause in my contract meant. No understanding that without my written consent, The company had no right to continue using the platform that powered over 80% of operations. But I said nothing. Just smiled, calm, polite, and very deliberate. Understood. I said, standing, extending a hand. He didn't take it, just nodded and turned away like it was all done. Before stepping out, he threw one more line over his shoulder. I'm not paying a cent to some washed-up staffer who peaked 5 years ago. I was still smiling. Good luck. Garrett. He hesitated at the door, maybe thrown off by my composure. Then he left. I packed slowly. A few personal items, the potted plant that had lived with me for 5 years, and a USB drive that only contained photos from our engineering team's last picnic. As I walked past the open workspace, a few people glanced up. Some looked away quickly. A few gave awkward nods. No one spoke. In places like this, fear spreads in silence. Once in my car, my hands started shaking. Not from sadness, from adrenaline. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was curious. How long before they realised what they'd done, I knew the answer. Monday. The weekend passed like a quiet storm. Heavy, still, charged with static. I told no one I'd been fired. Not my sister, who always said I overworked. Not my best friend who'd show up with wine and a 5-step revenge plan. Definitely not my ex-husband who once told me I was too ambitious and had married my job. I needed silence, space, clarity. Friday night. I took a long walk through the city, past quiet cafes and shuttered bookstores, letting the cold night air soothe the sting of betrayal. I didn't mourn the job. I mourned the insult, the arrogance, the way someone who had never written a line of code walked in, wiped away years of blood, sweat, and tears and labelled it obsolete. Saturday morning, I got to work, pulled the contract from my personal files. Everything was black and white. The patent was in my name. The clause was notarized. A short but airtight section granting me full control of the system I had built. Virion Systems only had usage rights via a licensing agreement, one that required my involvement. Signature for renewal, support for updates or expansion, and that agreement was set to expire Monday. I chuckled softly. Not because it was funny, because the timing was so exquisitely absurd. At 3 p.m, I sent an email to Virion's legal department, not from my locked-out company address, but my personal one. Subject line was simple. Expiry notice. IP usage rights. Urgent. I wrote concisely. Calmly. Without emotion. Just a reminder without a new agreement with me. The patent holder, the right to use the system, would expire at midnight Sunday. Continued use afterward would constitute IP infringement and carry legal consequences. I signed it, clearly Mira Dalton, inventor, architect of Virion Platform V23U, S, patent, no, US 9347901B, ICC'd the legal advisor, the former CTO, and, of course, Garrett. Then I closed the laptop, went for a run. 4 miles through foggy streets, dodging tourists and food trucks, feeling the tension dissolve with every step. By Sunday evening, my phone lit up non-stop. 2 missed calls from unknown numbers. 1 voicemail from HR Mira. We'd like to clarify a few points about your severance agreement. Another call from legal, please contact us ASAP to discuss the previous contract terms. And finally, late that night, an email from Garrett himself. Subject contract misunderstanding. Urgent resolution needed. H. Mira. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to speak directly to resolve this before the new work week begins. Please call me. Garrett. There it was. The panic. I didn't reply. Let them scramble. Let them walk into the office Monday. boot up the systems and realize the entire company infrastructure scheduling software, CRM, APIs, auto-reporting, client portals was running on a license they no longer had. I didn't need revenge. I just wanted respect. And if it came through emergency emails and fire alarm legal meetings, so be it. Monday morning. I was up early, coffee brewed, phone charged, laptop open. I sat on my couch in leggings and an oversized hoodie, watching the clock tick toward 8 a.m. Very start of business. 8:07. My inbox exploded. System errors. Back-end authentication failure. Urgent. Clients couldn't access the system. Mira, call me now. Garrett. Next came a message from Elena, an old friend who used to work in Product. Elena, did you actually do it? Please tell me you did. Garrett's losing it. The entire system is down. Meetings are cancelled. Clients are calling non-stop. The board has been notified. I smiled, not out of smugness, but clarity. This wasn't sabotage. This was what happened when those in power assumed competence without evidence and disregarded value they couldn't comprehend. We're 31. Ma'am. My phone rang. This time, I answered. Mira. Garrett's voice cracked on the line, trying to stay calm, but clearly panicked. We need to talk. I had no idea about the patent. Please come back to the company. I'm not coming back to work. Garrett, I interrupted gently. We're discussing licensing, with me as an external partner. Silence. He tried to regain composure. Mira. He softened his tone. Let's not make this personal. Oh, it's not, I replied. This is contractual, not emotional. I hung up, and just like that, negotiations had officially begun. I walked into the Virion building at 9:12 a.m. on Monday, not through the back employee entrance, but straight through the main lobby. My heels echoed crisply against the marble floor, each step deliberate and sharp. That sound was foreign after years of quietly slipping in with coffee and a laptop in hand. This wasn't a return. This was a re-entry. The receptionist froze when she saw me. Miss Dalton. Her voice trembled. I smiled. I have a meeting with legal. She nodded rapidly, fumbling to pick up the phone, her hands slightly shaking as she dialed. The lobby's atmosphere shifted, mid-conversation slowed. Employees threw subtle glances my way. 7th floor. They're expecting you. I stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirror composed, steady, but inside, my heart pounded. Not from fear, from focus. I'd spent the entire weekend preparing for this moment, not just to defend my work, but to reassert my worth. When I entered the legal department's conference room, the mood was tense. The lead counsel stood to greet me, followed by 2 in-house attorneys and a senior advisor I recognized from the previous merger. Garrett wasn't present. I took the chair at the head of the table. Let them speak first. Ms. Dalton, thank you for coming. The lead counsel began, voice polite but firm. We'd like to resolve this amicably. Of course, I said. I always support transparent solutions. I assume you've reviewed the license agreement. He nodded. We have, and your claim is valid. The system's patent is registered in your name, and per the contract, continued use without your consent constitutes a breach. The license expired at midnight, just as you indicated. He paused, then leaned forward. We'd like to propose a 1-year renewal, under the same terms, with full operational access. I smiled faintly. That won't work for me. A ripple went through the room. The senior advisor scribbled something in his notebook. "I didn't come here to repeat the old terms," I said calmly. "I came to renegotiate. I understand the system is currently disrupted. All client-facing platforms, internal reports, and developer access are affected." After a moment's hesitation, the lead counsel nodded. "That's correct. Then let's talk numbers," I said. "I want 1.2 million TARs for the next 12 months, non-exclusive license, renewable quarterly, technical support provided by me or a team I designate, and public attribution of my patent in the company's internal documentation." Not a threat. A demand reflecting the true market value of what they were using. The silence in the room showed they hadn't expected me to walk in this prepared. A female attorney cleared her throat. "That's a substantial increase. Proportionate to its value," I replied, "something this company has forgotten how to measure." The lead counsel leaned back. "We'll need to present this to the board." "I'll wait," I said. "But keep in mind, every hour of delay is an hour of lost client trust, reputational damage, and stock impact. I suggest urgency." No one objected. At 10:03, while I sat waiting outside the meeting room, phone on silent, water bottle in hand, I saw Garrett walk past the hallway on the other side of the glass. He hadn't seen me. When he finally did, his eyes locked. His expression shifted from surprise to realization. He walked toward me, slower than usual. "Careful, Mira," he said, trying to stay civil. "I didn't expect you to come in person." "No, Garrett, you didn't expect anything at all," I replied evenly. "I think this has gone too far. We should have talked before lawyers got involved." "You mean before you fired me? That decision was based on incomplete information." "No." I stood. "That decision was based on ego. And now, you're dealing with the consequences." He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. "I'm not angry, Garrett. I'm just done being underestimated. Everything I have, the patent, the licensing agreement. Your baseless termination email is documented. I didn't come here to argue. I came to negotiate. If you still want to salvage the contract and maybe your position, let your legal team work." His jaw clenched. I turned back toward the conference room. "Oh, Garrett," I said as I disappeared through the door. Good luck. There it was again. Luck, something I've never needed. By noon, the conference room was full again. But the energy was different now. Tension sharp enough to cut through. The board hadn't arrived, but their presence was felt in every word from the legal team. The tone had shifted, from misunderstanding to legal crisis threatening operations and shareholder confidence. I remained steady. The lead counsel sat across from me. He looked less composed than in the morning. His tie was crooked, jaw tense. "We've reviewed your proposal," he said cautiously. "And while we feel your terms are aggressive, accurate," I corrected. He paused, then nodded. "Accurate. We agree to the fee, with one condition, a 6-month contract, quarterly renewal as you proposed. For the patent attribution, we'd prefer the phrase technical partnership instead of direct mention of the patent." I leaned forward. "No." He frowned. "Excuse me. I want it stated clearly and publicly. The system was designed and patented by Mira Dalton. No dilution, no euphemisms. This company has relied on the platform I built for 6 years. Every person here has benefited from it. I won't walk away in silence so Garrett can save face." The room fell silent. The female attorney looked down at her notebook, saying nothing. The senior advisor resumed scribbling. The lead counsel adjusted his glasses. "We'll take it to the board. Please do, I said, gathering my papers. And while you're at it, be transparent. The SEC doesn't take kindly to buried IP issues, especially when they impact operations. That line hit like a gavel. Everyone knew a single system-wide IP breach could trigger investor backlash, audits, even delisting threats. I knew their playbook, and now I had my own rules. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw Elena standing by the elevator. This time, Eleanor was standing in a corner of the hallway near the elevator. When she saw me, she squinted, half surprised, half admiring. "They're calling you the upper floor firewall." She giggled. I smiled faintly. "Better that than being called expendable." Elena laughed, then lowered her voice. "Everyone's talking. Garrett's spinning stories. Told the board it was all a misunderstanding, that you never warned anyone the license was about to expire." "A lie," I said, firm but calm. "Let him talk. The truth doesn't need to shout." Eleanor leaned in and whispered, "Everyone's seen the memo you sent. You CC'd the whole legal team ahead of time. There's paperwork all over the place. The interns are whispering like it's Watergate." I didn't respond right away. My mind was already past the chatter, because regaining control wasn't enough. I wanted accountability. The next morning, I sent a follow-up email, not to legal, not to Garrett, but directly to the chair of the board, whose address I still had from a years-old collaboration. The subject line was simple, regarding system licensing, internal disclosure, and executive conduct. I wrote with a tone that was polite, concise, and entirely factual. I laid out the scope of the patent, its critical role in operations, the timeline of the termination, the license conflict, and how Garrett Vaughan had made decisions without reviewing internal legal obligations. I closed with a single question. If this is how he manages internal personnel, what should you expect when he deals with partners, suppliers, or external regulators? That afternoon, a reply came not from the chair directly, but from a senior representative of the board, Mira. "Thank you for your clarity and professionalism. Please know we are treating this matter with the utmost seriousness. The board will review all materials you've submitted. In the meantime, we support the licensing agreement and aim to finalize it within 48 hours under the terms you proposed. We regret that current leadership failed to acknowledge your contributions sooner." I stared at the email for a moment, then leaned back in my chair. It wasn't a public apology, but it was a shift not just in the story, but in the power dynamics. That evening, Eleanor texted again. "Garrett's freaking out. Board meeting is scheduled first thing tomorrow. His assistant says he's calling in favors, trying to regain control." I typed back slowly, "Let him try. I have the truth," and a paper trail longer than his resume. The next day was no longer about licensing. It would be a confrontation. The board convened promptly at 9:00 on Wednesday. At 9:23, I received an official invitation. Not from Garrett, not from legal, from the chair of the board himself. The email was brief, its tone clear. "Please join our closed session at 11:00 a.m. Your perspective is critical to the ongoing review." That word critical made me pause. 2 weeks ago, I'd been labelled no longer necessary. Now, I was considered critical, bitter, but honest. At 10:55, I entered the executive boardroom on the top floor of Virion headquarters, the same room where I'd once presented a system upgrade to the former CEO. Back then, I'd been a shadow in the corner. Today, I walked directly to the seat reserved for me. No hesitation. Garrett was already there, seated opposite, arms crossed, phone face down on the table like a stage prop in a play he was no longer starring in. His tie was straight, his smile forced, but the worry in his eyes was unmistakably real. The board chair began with standard formalities, then turned to me. "Mira, thank you for coming. We've reviewed the licensing terms and the documentation you provided. We'd like to hear your perspective before we proceed with our evaluation." I nodded. I stood, opened my notebook but didn't read from it. I looked each person in the eye. Leadership isn't about control. It's about understanding the systems that run a company, whether they're technological or human. When a new executive walks in without grasping the foundation, they have two choices: listen or bulldoze. Garrett chose the latter. He shifted in his seat, but said nothing. He called me outdated, fired me without considering any legal implications, and dismissed a system his company depended on to survive. The worst part is, he only started listening after everything collapsed. After servers went down, after clients started calling, I let the silence hang. Everything I built, every line of code I wrote, was meant to protect this company. But no system is strong enough to defend against arrogance. If a CEO doesn't understand operational architecture, or the people who built it, this company isn't just facing legal risk, it's facing existential risk. The room was completely still. Then, a board member leaned forward. "If you were in his seat, what would you do?" I smiled slightly. I wouldn't take his seat. I'd stand beside someone who knows how to balance product, culture, and compliance. I'd build a leadership model based on collaboration, not control. And I wouldn't wait until a lawsuit to start respecting the people keeping this company alive. A pause. "Thank you. Mira." The chair nodded. "Please, wait outside while we hold a closed discussion." I stood, nodded to each of them in turn, and walked out. 10 minutes later, I heard raised voices from behind the door. Not mine. Garrett's. He had started blaming others: legal, the former CTO, even HR. His final move. The familiar one: deflect blame until it disappears. But this time, it didn't disappear. 11:47. The board chair stepped into the hallway. "Mira, we've reached a decision. Please, come back in." I followed him into the room. Garrett was no longer there. Effective immediately. He said, "Garrett Vaughan is suspended from his position, pending formal investigation. We'll issue an internal notice and publicly acknowledge your contributions to the operational platform and the recovery of Virion." He handed me a printed statement. I read the first line aloud. "We recognise the leadership, innovation, and intellectual ownership of Mira Dalton as foundational to the success of Virion Systems." It moved me more than I expected. Not because I needed the praise, but because I knew how many women in tech never got mentioned. "What would you like to do next?" he asked. "I've agreed to the licensing contract," I replied, "and I'm open to short-term advisory support. I won't return full-time. I want to retain autonomy and help build safeguards so this doesn't happen to anyone else." He nodded. "Consider it done." I stood. As I reached the door, he called out, "Mira, you didn't just protect the system. You saved the company." I turned, gave a small nod. "I know." As I walked back into the hallway, the weight that had clung to me for days began to fall away. Not all at once, but piece by piece, like armour I no longer needed. At the end of the corridor, Eleanor was waiting. "He's gone," she whispered. I smiled. "He's only been suspended." "And you?" she asked. I looked through the glass, toward the floor I once called home. "I'm just getting started." I didn't want to leave with just a victory. I wanted to leave something that mattered. Less than a week later, the consulting agreement was finalised. I would remain at Virion for another 90 days, helping the engineering team stabilise the system post-crisis and prepare the handover to my successor as chief architect, all on my terms and at my pace. People kept asking if I'd return in an official capacity. The answer was always no, because even though I still loved the work, the company had changed, and so had I. One afternoon, 2 weeks into my new role, I stood outside the building after a long meeting. Nearby, a group of interns walked by after their shift. One young woman, thick glasses and a shy smile, paused when she saw me. "Are you Mira Dalton?" I nodded. Her face lit up. "I just wanted to thank you. What you did. Everyone's been talking about it in the Slack channels. You made us feel like we have the right to speak up." I smiled, genuinely. "Then speak up. Don't wait for permission." She nodded, then jogged to catch up with her friends, leaving me with an unfamiliar feeling. Not quite pride. Something deeper. Legacy. That weekend, for the first time, I allowed myself to truly rest. I took the train out of the city, turned off my phone, and watched the world blur past the window. For the first time in months, my mind wasn't spinning with plans or defences, just stillness, peace. That night, I wrote in my journal the first entry since everything began. One line stood out: I never asked for power. I only asked to be recognised. And when they couldn't give me that, I built my own table instead of begging for a seat at theirs. In the weeks that followed, the news began to leak. Garrett Vaughan wasn't coming back. The internal statement cited irreconcilable differences in leadership approach. There were rumours of prior complaints, shady terminations before mine. The company culture began to shift slowly but noticeably. Exit interviews were restructured. Internal training now included modules on intellectual property rights, and, for the first time, credit became a line item in engineering evaluations. Some leaders tried to rewrite the story. "Mira's always been an integral part of the team," one said during a panel. "We've always valued her expertise. I didn't speak up to correct them. I didn't need to." The people who mattered knew the truth, and the code I wrote still held. The architecture I built kept running, and my name, finally, was right where it belonged. On the system, in the acknowledgements, and in the story itself. Months later, I received a handwritten letter from David, the chair of the board. "Mira, you changed how we see leadership, not by pushing back, but by standing firm. Thank you for showing us what real power looks like." I keep that letter in the drawer, the same one where I used to keep my resignation papers, a reminder of where I started and the fact that I refused to end there. Today, I run my own consulting firm. I only work with companies that want more than buzzword leadership. They want sustainable systems and people empowered to thrive. I choose my clients carefully. I set clear boundaries. And I never sign anything without reading the smallest print. Because, in the end, this story was never about revenge. It was about value, presence, and the quiet power of someone who refuses to disappear just because the system tried to erase them. So, to anyone out there who's ever been underestimated, sidelined, or labelled difficult, just because they knew their worth, I have only one piece of advice. You don't need to shout to make an impact. You just need to know who you are, and never hand that power to someone who doesn't see you. Because when they fire you thinking they've silenced your voice, the only thing they've done is spark the fire. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the stakes. in a world that tried to erase her. Mira Dalton didn't just protect her work. She rewrote the rules of what leadership, ownership, and dignity really look like. From silent meetings to boardroom reckonings, she proved that knowing your worth is louder than any title. She didn't wait to be invited back in. She walked in, stood tall, and changed everything. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told you were too much, let this story remind you you are never too much for the space that was meant for you. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, made you pause, made you think, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because stories like this deserve to be seen, and voices like hers deserve to echo. See you in the next story.